Okay, this is 6th Street and Loma Drive. This is where they brought the young, lifeless, seemingly lifeless Bobby Kennedy, age 42, about approximately 12:30 a.m. June the 5th, 1968, on that warm, early morning. Okay, this was the Central Receiving Hospital. Now I got a question. If you have about 100 yards from here, you have a first-rate hospital, Good Samaritan. Why would you bring him here first, which is actually a glorified first aid station? Why would you bring him here? They didn't have an x-ray machine, no plasma, and the doctor, his name was V. Faustin Basilauskas. He said when they brought him in here, he was pulseless. His blood pressure was almost 0. And his heart was very faint. Now this, ironically, this Central Receiving Hospital, it was torn down the same year they tore down the Ambassador Hotel, ironically. And it's actually also like the Ambassador, built to almost the same elevation, the same plan. And this is exactly where, when I came, before they tore it down in 2005, this is where the entrance was to the emergency, where they would have brought Kennedy, Bobby Kennedy. Now it's the Rampart Division. And when they brought his body here, there were 300, 400 people with candles saying a Catholic rosary for this wonderful gentleman. And most of this is all extant from the 1920s and teen era, all these old buildings. But here is where they brought him on that early morning. And Dr. Basilauskas said that he ordered oxygen, of course, and then he ran a air tube down his throat, and then he massaged his heart for 10 minutes, he said. And of course Ethel was standing there frantic, and he gave him adrenaline, he gave him albumin, and he gave him dextran because there was no plasma, so that he had to give him a blood substitute. And he said he rallied, and he said that his blood pressure went to 150 over 90, and then his heartbeat got faster, and then he started breathing in little gas. And so he was here about 30 minutes. And ironically, there's a Catholic church, oh, I'd say about 100 yards west of where I took you, on the west side of the former Ambassador Hotel. It's a Catholic church called St. Basil's, and there was a priest. His name was Father Thomas Picha. He heard on the radio he was coming back again serendipitously from giving Holy Unction to a dying parishioner. He got out, and he introduced himself. They let him in, and they took him into the emergency room, and he said that he gave him Holy Unction, last rites to Bobby Kennedy. And before the Dr. Basilauskas started massaging his heart, he said that he slapped Bobby really hard, and he was saying, "Bob, can you hear us, Bob?" And Ethel kept on saying, "Don't do that, don't do that." So before I follow through and make a left here on 6th Street, I just want the world to see and call it a conspiracy. We're talking about a U.S. Senator, the Attorney General, the former Attorney General, the brother of the late John F. Kennedy. There, right there, is Good Samaritan Hospital with a first-rate emergency room. Now, I ask you, why would they bring him here where they had no x-ray and no blood plasma when they could have simply taken him right there, which they did 30 minutes later, and then 3 hours later, about 3:44 a.m., he went into surgery. Why so long? And then, of course, he was in a coma until 1:44, and he died June 6th. And then they flew him out to New York, and he laid in state until June 8th, 10 a.m. And then what they did was they put him on a train to the 225 miles. They took him up down that railroad where hundreds of thousands of people lined the tracks. And incidentally, there was a tragedy that happened there on the way in Elizabeth, New Jersey. They said that oddly, the car that was carrying his casket, the brakes kept on slipping and getting stuck. And there was a parallel train, and some kind of occurrence happened, and 2 people ran over. So he laid in state. And then they took him to Alexandria, Virginia, to Arlington Cemetery. I believe that's where it's at. I know it's in Virginia. And he was buried at 10:30 p.m. The first known burial at night. And they said apparently they buried Patrick, the late John F. Kennedy's young infant son, there at night. And then recently they buried Edward Kennedy. So let me go and end this little homage to the great Bobby Kennedy and take you apparently where the emergency room must have been, because right there at next to this white building, that's where the new emergency room is. So I would assume that it would have been in back of the old building at Good Samaritan. So let me show the world how close, and shall I say how dangerously close, a first-rate emergency room was from this glorified first aid station. And they kept them here, they said, about 30 minutes when they, like I said, they could have just taken them straight to the hospital. And of course, God only knows if he would have survived anyway, so maybe it didn't matter. Maybe that's what they thought, who knows. Okay, so follow me, and thank you for watching this little slight third part, and let me continue. Thank you.
I hate to say it, but I told you so. Don't mind my preaching to you. I said don't trust them, baby, now you know. You don't let everything there is to know it's true. Would you believe me when I gave advice? I said that he was a tease.
Okay, I want to show the world in this last video how obnoxiously close this first-rate hospital's emergency room was to the central receiving station in that early morning of June 5th, 1968. Now right there in that jutting out acute angle building right there, that's the new emergency. But it's in back of the old building that you can't see from here, but there, right there is where the emergency was at the central receiving station. So I asked the world, why so close and yet so far? Now, when you read about it on the internet, they say they had to take him 30 minutes later, several blocks. What several blocks? A block. About 100 yards. Now, even if the emergency room, the new one, is right there, most likely was a couple of, maybe another 100 feet behind the old building. So before I turn left right here on 6th Street, to end this little homage to that fine gentleman, U.S. Senator, Attorney General, advocated for civil rights, went after the mob, organized crime, and just always trying to help the poor and the helpless. Let me give you the world my little homage and little eulogy to Bobby. It was June 6th, that death, the year 1968 to be exact, that they blacked out to redact Bobby's potential presidential fact. Thereafter, his California leads, when Juan Romero gave him those beads. Killed by a deed from which we still can't cope, Bobby was the last of the great white hope. So God bless you, Bobby. Hope you're in a better place. And we never forget you wherever you're at. And good sir, may I say, good night. Sweet Prince. Okay, this is how close Bobby Kennedy was to a first-rate hospital with plasma and an x-ray machine. Central Receiving Hospital, about 30 minutes, maybe 12:45. They moved them a block and a half. And when you read about it on the internet, they say several blocks. What several blocks? There's the block. Here's Good Samaritan. We're coming up to I guess the new emergency. Looks like the building was put up in the early 80s. But if I'm going to use a chain of logic, it would have still been attached to the old building, and I'll make a right on Lucas. But here's the newer one. Obviously they wouldn't have brought him here, but there's the current emergency right there. So I'm gonna say they came this way about 12:45, I say, because when he got shot a little bit after 12, maybe they would have transported him about 12:20 from the Ambassador, and then they would have made a right. So like I said, a chain of logic, I'm gonna say that they that the emergency room was right here attached to the old building. And of course this wouldn't have been here, right here, probably a bunch of commercial buildings at that time. So I'm just saying, I bet this is where it was, where they brought Bobby Kennedy, who died about 25 hours later. So here's the old building, Good Samaritan Hospital. And okay, I'm gonna attach this to the end, and the fourth part. So let's finish off with a little roundabout so the world can see how viciously, how dangerously close where Bobby precipitously and abruptly and prematurely left us, leaving us asking the constant question, what was his potential, what would have been capable, with no resolution. So I think whenever people vanish like that from this world, so young and so fast, it just leaves us questioning and wondering what could have been. So again, good night, Sweet Prince, and thank you, and please subscribe to my channel.